Okay, I think today we're going to talk about practical jokes. I'm not sure how I developed it as a child, but my whole life I've always enjoyed, for as long as I can remember anyway, playing tricks on people. I can remember with my mom even that we used to squirt like ketchup on our arms and then come running in telling her we had cut ourselves real bad just to make her scream. I can remember probably about the age of 7 or 8 writing a message on a piece of paper saying that I had been kidnapped and please come and try to find me, and then putting it in a jar and burying it in the ground, just thinking maybe someday somebody will dig this up and wonder who it was from. I was very good about being patient with practical jokes. I didn't have to even care if people saw them or not. I just was fun to do the practical joke, and for the joy just came wondering if someday somebody would see this. Another example would be once we just had a brand new snowfall, about 4 or 6 inches of snow. As I was walking out to the corrals through the snow, and mine were the only footprints, I thought, well, this could be kind of interesting. So I walked past the corrals and way out into the field, probably 100 yards. And then I walked exactly backward, stepping in my same footprints, thinking that probably nobody will see this, but if anybody's ever follows these footprints to see where somebody was walking, and they get out to the middle of this field and they just disappear, they'll wonder what happened to this person. Like I say, I never told anybody to follow the footprints or anything. I just thought, well, it'd be cool if somebody ever did this. I remember going out again into the field, even further away, and climbing to the top of the highest tree I could find and sticking a reflector in it, so that whenever friends would come over to my house and it was nighttime, I could hide a flashlight shining on that reflector. And I had made up a story about how this mysterious light appears in the sky at night, and we've never been able to figure out what it was. This was not very nice, but we're being honest here. I remember once my mom used to have these styrofoam heads that she used to put her wigs on, I guess. I don't know if she ever wore wigs, but I remember the styrofoam heads. And I remember dressing it up really bloody, not dressing it up, but making it up with a knife stuck in it and making it as scary as I could. And then I told my brother Race we needed to go up there and get something out of this room. And I'd loosened the light bulbs so you couldn't turn on the light, and as soon as we got to the door, I pushed him in and held the door closed so he couldn't get out. So yeah, that wasn't very nice. I remember Race inviting his friend over to our house once. In the back of my mind, I think I might have told this story, but I can never remember which ones I've told on camera and just which ones I've told the grandkids before. But this is one where Rayson had one of his friends on a sleepover one night. And so I told Race to get the friend and to start telling him scary stories. There was 2 beds in the bedroom, one on each side of the bedroom, and I hid underneath one of them. And so I had Race start telling him scary stories, and then once the story got really scary, I come out from underneath the bed behind where the guy was sitting so he couldn't see me. Actually, the first thing I did was I thought he was laying in bed. I didn't know he was sitting on the bed. So I just reached out from under the bed and reached across the bed and went like this to grab him. When I reached down and grabbed him, there was nobody there. So then I looked out from underneath the bed and I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed like this, listening to the stories. And so I grabbed him from behind and let out a yell. And I remember he screamed, and he had his legs folded kind of in his lap, like sitting on the edge of the bed. And all I can remember was he sprung up from that Indian sitting type position. What do you call that anyway? He sprang up from that position and landed on my brother's bed on the other side of the room and let out the loudest scream you can imagine. I think the one that got scared the most was me, because I knew if we woke up my dad, I could get a beating for it. And so I remember as soon as it happened, running to my bedroom and getting underneath my covers and pretending like I was asleep. And luckily, for whatever reason, I don't know if my dad didn't wake up or he just wasn't in the mood to beat anybody, but I got away without any beating that time. Speaking of, this gets me off on a tangent. Maybe I'll tell, well, I better tell it because I'll forget if I try to do it later. My dad did have a bad temper. I think I've told people at times that I remember once he came home. We just bought some cattle at the auction. There were some younger calves, and with younger calves you're supposed to leave them overnight in the corrals for a couple of days because they'll be lonely and they'll be walking around looking up and down the fence line looking for their mother or whatever they look for. But we had forgotten, we were just young teenagers, and we fed the calves, but then we let them out into the pasture instead of keeping them in the corrals. And when my dad got home, he found out that we had let those calves out, and he sent us out in the middle of the night looking for these calves all over the pasture. We had about, I think it was 70 acres on that part of the field. Altogether, my dad owned about 5,000 acres. This particular area was about 70 acres. So we spent hours out there in the night looking for those calves. I think it was my dad's way of teaching us a lesson. But I remember when we got back, he was still mad at us. And he had this horse whip that used, or actually it's more of a cattle whip, I guess, that he would use when we had to round up cattle and stuff. And I remember he turned to my brother Rick and asked my brother Rick, "Are you ever going to let those calves out again?" And Rick said no, and so my dad hit Rick with this whip. And then he turned to me and he said, "Are you ever going to let those calves out again?" To which I said no. And so he whacked me with the whip. And then he said, "My little brother Race, are you ever going to let those calves out again?" And Race, after seeing Rick and I both get whipped, he said, "Yes, yes, I will." Which made my dad laugh so hard Race didn't get whipped, which made me even more upset that we got whipped and Race got out of it. Maybe it was because he was the youngest, Dad didn't want to whip him, I don't know. But I think it was because Dad was laughing. Anyway, that got me off topic, but I wanted to tell that story because I'd forgotten to write down to tell that story. Maybe sometime I'll tell you some of the other stories about my dad's bad temper, but I want to get on with the practical joke stories. I told one last week, I think it was, about the newspaper. This is probably my second favorite practical joke that I did as a teacher. Or I guess I was still assistant principal then. That I think I did a video, actually I think it's on YouTube, a video showing when we were playing the women's basketball team and we actually beat them in the game, which I love to brag about. But we'd invited the women's team to our school to be a speaker to the kids at an assembly. And we'd do like the male basketball players and stuff. But one year we thought we should do the women's basketball team. And after the game was over with, one of the parents of the kids in our school worked at the daily newspaper for our area. His name was Dick Harmon, and he was the sports editor. And I guess he wrote up a short story about how we had played the women's basketball team and put it in the newspaper. And I don't even know if it told we won or not, or if it told much of anything. It was just a little fluff piece. But as I was reading this story and I was in the office, and I was one of those days I was bored again, I thought, wow, I could write a better newspaper story than that. And so I changed the story to talk about how we had won the game, and particularly pointing out one of my favorite people to tease at the school. His name was Clark Hansen. And I pointed out about how Clark Hansen was the hero of the game, and how many shots he blocked and how many points he scored and stuff. And then I just finished it off, and then I printed it out with the exact same font and the exact same size on a printer. And I cut it out and laid it on top of the newspaper and taped it in so you couldn't see the tape lines. And I made a photocopy of this newspaper article that showed not only that article but all the ones around it. But then I distributed it throughout the faculty room so all the teachers and everybody would see this newspaper article about Clark Hansen and what a great basketball player he was. And once again, I was very patient. I didn't say or do anything or even talk to Clark about it. But I can imagine that he went home and showed the article to his wife and kids and everybody that he wanted to brag to about this newspaper article about him. And it was about a week later that Sean Bradley announced that he wasn't coming back to BYU from his mission. He had said he was going to come back for 1 year, but he decided to go straight to the NBA instead. And I thought, well, I never did follow up on that last joke. Maybe I'll change this one. So I did the same thing again. I typed up an article that talked about how Sean Bradley, well, it was already talking about Sean Bradley. I just had to add a paragraph at the end. And I said the coach, and I think it was Roger Reed back then, was looking for some really good center that they could look to replace Sean Bradley, because now they need a new center. And I said he's particularly interested in Clark Hansen because he's heard such good things about his basketball skills and stuff. And I don't remember what all I wrote, but that was the gist of the whole thing. And then I photocopied it again and made it look like it was really straight from the newspaper by showing the other stories on both sides of it and above it and below it. Made it really look like it was part of the newspaper. And then I spread that one around the faculty room again. And I once again didn't say anything to Clark or any of the teachers. I just left it there. And later that day, Clark Hansen comes up to me holding up this newspaper and article and saying, "Did you know anything about this?" To which I looked at it and tried to be as innocent as possible and said, "No, I don't know anything about it. But now that I think about it, it makes me wonder about that article last week, if that one was even true." And probably at that point I did start laughing a little bit. I just remember seeing the look on his face when it suddenly occurred to him that not only was that story a lie, but the one that he had told everybody the week before had been a lie also. So that was mean also. Not as mean as some of the stuff I've done, but those are the ones I can tell at least. I thought while I was on, this is the longest story I've told. Maybe I'll save the rest for another one so that we break up this video a little bit. And with that, kill the video.